Today I bring you an impressive story that will give you goosebumps. The story of Pastor Thomas Whitmore, who, after a tragic accident, had a near-death experience and received an apocalyptic revelation that changed his life forever. He saw the future of humanity, and what he discovered will surprise you. Prepare yourself for a spiritual journey full of mysteries and warnings about what is to come. But before we start, leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impactful content like this, and activate the bell to stay up to date with the next revelations. Hello, my name is Thomas. I'm 42 years old, and I'm a pastor in a small town called Athens, Ohio. I never thought I would be here telling this story, but life sometimes surprises us in ways we can't imagine. I have always been a man of faith, dedicated to my congregation and my family. My wife, Emma, was the pillar of my life, my companion at all times. Together, we build a life based on love and devotion to God. But things weren't always easy. A few years ago, Emma was diagnosed with cancer, and our lives were turned upside down. Watching her fight her illness was the hardest thing I've ever faced. When she passed away, I felt like a part of me had died with her. My faith, which had always been unshakable, began to waver. I wondered how a loving God could allow so much suffering. It was at this moment of profound spiritual crisis that something extraordinary happened, something that completely changed my perspective on life, death, and God himself. It is this experience that I want to talk about today, an experience that took me beyond the limits of life and death, and brought me back with a new understanding of our purpose here on earth. It was a Sunday like any other. I had just finished the church service and was heading home. The day was beautiful. The sun was shining in the sky, and I was driving thoughtfully, reflecting on the sermon I had just given. I remember thinking about Emma, how she would have loved that sunny day. Suddenly, everything changed. I saw a car coming towards me at high speed. The driver appeared to have lost control. I tried to dodge, but there was no time. The impact was violent. I remember the deafening sound of the collision, the shattering glass, the twisting metal. My body was thrown out of the car, and I felt excruciating pain for a brief moment. And then, in the blink of an eye, the pain disappeared. Everything was silent. I found myself floating above the scene of the accident. It was like I was watching a movie. I could see my body stretched out on the asphalt, motionless. People running, screaming for help. Someone calling an ambulance. It was surreal. I knew I was seeing my own body, but I didn't feel fear or panic. Just a strange feeling of calm and detachment. At that moment, I knew I was dead. Or at least that's what I thought. There was no doubt in my mind. I had left my physical body behind. But instead of the end, this was just the beginning of an incredible journey. When I found myself floating above the scene of the accident, my first reaction was complete disbelief. How was this possible? I could see my body below, motionless, as paramedics worked frantically to revive me. It was a surreal feeling, as if I were watching a film about my own death. But the strangest thing of all was that I didn't feel afraid, neither panic nor anxiety. Nothing like I would have expected to feel when I found myself on the brink of death. Instead, there was a deep calm, a serene acceptance of what was happening. As I watched the scene, I noticed that my perception had changed drastically. I could see colors I had never seen before, tones and hues that don't exist in the normal visible spectrum. The world around me seemed to vibrate with a pulsating energy, as if every object, every living thing was made of pure light. My hearing was also different. It could hear sounds that would normally be beyond human reach. The hum of moving air molecules, the whisper of leaves on trees miles away, even the distant sound of radio waves piercing the ether. It was a cosmic symphony that left me in awe. It was then that I felt a presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear in the conventional sense, but a deep sense that I wasn't alone. It was a welcoming, comforting presence that seemed to envelop me in an ethereal embrace. I felt a slight tug, as if someone was gently guiding me away from the scene of the accident. I couldn't resist. Something inside me knew it was the right path to take. As I walked away, I saw my body getting smaller and smaller until the entire scene disappeared into a point of light. Suddenly, I found myself walking through what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. But calling it a tunnel is a gross oversimplification. It was more like a multi-dimensional corridor, with fractal patterns unfolding in all directions. The walls, if I can call them that, pulsed with bright, ever-changing colors, creating shapes and patterns that defied Euclidean geometry. As I traveled through this tunnel, I began to experience a life review. But it wasn't like in the movies where your whole life flashes before your eyes in a flash. It was much deeper and more meaningful. Every moment of my life was available to me, not in a linear sequence, but all at the same time, as if time were a dimension I could navigate at will. I was able to relive moments from my childhood with surprising clarity. The smell of my mother's perfume, the sound of my father's laughter, the texture of the grass beneath my bare feet on a summer day. Each memory was experienced not just visually, but with all the senses, and also with a deep understanding of the meaning and lessons behind each experience. I saw the moments when I made important decisions in my life, the choice to become a pastor, the day I met Emma, our first fight, our reconciliation. But the most interesting thing is that I could see not only what happened, but also the paths not taken. It was as if all the possibilities of each decision unfolded before me, showing how my life could have been different if I had made other choices. This life review was not a judgment. There was no condemnation for the mistakes I made, no praise for the good deeds. It was more like a deep, compassionate understanding of my entire journey. I could see how every experience, every choice, every relationship had contributed to shaping who I was. As I progressed through the tunnel, I began to feel a shift in my consciousness. It was as if my mind was expanding, encompassing more than I ever thought possible. I began to see glimpses of universal knowledge and truths. For a brief moment, I felt as if I could understand the mysteries of the universe, the nature of reality, the purpose of existence. But just as these revelations began to form in my mind, I realized they were beyond my ability to retain or express in human terms. It was like trying to hold water with my hands open. The more I tried to hold on to this knowledge, the more it slipped away. As this was happening, I noticed that the tunnel was coming to an end. The light in front of me grew brighter, more intense. It was not a blinding or uncomfortable light, but rather welcoming and warm. I felt drawn to her, as if I were returning home after a long journey. As I approached the end of the tunnel, I was overcome by a feeling of unconditional love so deep and overwhelming it's hard to put into words. It was as if all the love in the universe was converging on me at that moment. Love of God, love of all creation, love of all beings that have ever existed or will exist. It was an infinite ocean of compassion, acceptance, and understanding. In that instant, all the doubts, fears, and worries I had ever had seemed to melt away. I felt completely at peace, completely accepted, completely loved. It was like I had found my true home, my true self. And it was in this state of ecstasy and enlightenment that I emerged from the tunnel, ready for what came next on my journey beyond life as I knew it. Emma's presence grew stronger. Although I couldn't see her with my eyes, I felt her with my entire being. It was as if our souls were communicating directly, without the need for words or gestures. The love we shared in life seemed small compared to what I felt now. It was a pure, unconditional love, free from any earthly limitations. Emma showed me things I couldn't fully understand. Visions of a greater plan, of how everything was interconnected. I saw how every decision we make, every action, no matter how small, has an impact on the great fabric of existence. It was as if, for a brief moment, I could see the universe working in perfect harmony. Through this connection with Emma, I began to understand that my journey on Earth was not yet over. There was more for me to do, more for me to learn and teach. Emma showed me that my crisis of faith, my struggle with her loss, was all part of a bigger plan. Not to punish myself, but to prepare myself for something important that I still needed to accomplish. I wanted to stay there forever, in that perfect union with Emma and the divine. But Emma, in her infinite wisdom and love, made me understand that it was not my time yet. She assured me that she would always be with me, even if I couldn't see or feel her the same way when I returned. It was a bittersweet moment. I was reluctant to leave that peace, that perfect love. But at the same time, I felt a renewal of purpose. I knew I needed to return, that I had a mission to accomplish. Emma gave me the strength to accept this, to embrace what was to come, however difficult it might be. After saying goodbye to Emma, I felt a subtle change in the environment around me. The soft, welcoming light that surrounded me began to intensify, becoming brighter and more vibrant. It was as if I was being transported to a completely different plane of existence. Suddenly I found myself in a place that defies description in human terms. The colors were more vivid than anything I had ever seen on Earth. Imagine the brightest colors you have ever seen and multiply that intensity by 1,000. There were tones I didn't even know existed, colors that seemed to sing and dance around me. The air, if I can call it that, seemed to be alive. Every breath I took filled me with pure, invigorating energy. It was as if I could feel the very essence of creation flowing through me. The sounds were equally surreal. They were not sounds in the conventional sense, but rather a cosmic symphony that reverberated in every fiber of my being. It was in this extraordinary environment that I noticed a presence approaching. At first it was just a feeling, an awareness that I was not alone on this celestial plane. Then gradually, the presence began to take shape before my eyes, or whatever I was using to see in that state. The being that manifested itself before me was, without a doubt, an angel. But forget everything you've ever seen in Renaissance paintings or statues in churches. This being had nothing to do with the image of a winged man dressed in white. It was an entity of pure light and energy, constantly shifting and transforming. At times it seemed to be made up of millions of tiny points of light, like microscopic stars dancing in perfect harmony. At other times it took on more defined forms, like waves of pulsating energy, or complex geometric patterns that unfolded into dimensions I didn't even know existed. The most impressive thing was the feeling of power and wisdom that emanated from this being. It was such an imposing presence that under normal circumstances I would probably have been terrified. But in that heightened state of consciousness, I felt only awe and a deep sense of peace. The angel did not speak to me using words in the conventional sense. Instead, their communication was direct, mind to mind or perhaps soul to soul. Each word was more than just a concept. It was a complete experience, full of emotions, images, and deep understandings. The first message I received was one of comfort and welcome. The angel made me understand that my presence there was not an accident, but part of a greater plan. I was enveloped by a feeling of unconditional love so intense that I almost felt overwhelmed. It was as if all the love in the universe was directed at me at that moment. Then the angel began to show me visions of the future. They were not like the images we see on a movie screen or in dreams. It was as if I was really there, experiencing each scene with all my senses. The first vision was of what the angel called the first seal. I saw a white horse galloping across the world. Its rider carried a bow and was given a crown. I understood this to symbolize a conqueror, someone who was already at work in the world, although his true nature was not yet fully understood by most people. Then the vision changed, and the angel showed me what would happen when the second seal was opened. The date September 18, 2024 appeared clearly in my mind, as if engraved in fire. I saw a red horse emerge, and its rider had the power to take peace from the earth. The scenes that followed were harrowing. I saw nations rising up against each other, conflicts erupting in every corner of the globe. These were not just conventional wars, but also civil wars, revolts, social chaos on a scale I had never imagined possible. I saw cities burning, panicked crowds in the streets, government systems crumbling. It was as if the entire structure of society was being dismantled. The scariest thing was seeing how the conflict spread like a virus, infecting even previously peaceful communities. As I watched these terrifying visions, I felt the angel imparting a deeper understanding to me. These events, as terrible as they were not the end. They were part of a larger process, a necessary transformation that humanity needed to go through. The angel made me understand that, just as an individual sometimes needs to face crises to grow and evolve, humanity as a whole was entering a period of trials that would lead to a collective evolution of consciousness. Then the angel showed me something else. Little points of light in the midst of the darkness. These were people and communities who, even in the face of chaos, maintained their faith and compassion. I saw acts of kindness and courage in the midst of despair, people helping each other, sacrificing themselves for the common good. I understood that these lights represented hope for the future. It was at that moment that I received my mission. The angel made me understand that I should return to the world of the living and share what I had seen, not to spread fear or panic, but to prepare those who were willing to listen. My task would be to help people strengthen their faith and love, to prepare themselves spiritually for the challenges that would come. It should remind them that, even in the darkest moments, the light of divine love never goes out completely. The angel showed me that every person I could reach with this message would become one of those points of light that I had seen. Every individual who chose love and compassion over fear and hate would make a difference in the final outcome. When the vision ended, I was momentarily stunned by the enormity of what I had experienced. The angel, sensing my overload, enveloped me once again in that feeling of unconditional love. I was reminded that despite the magnitude of the task before me, I would not be alone. The divine presence would always be with me, guiding me and strengthening me. Before I could ask any questions or express my doubts, I felt myself being gently pulled back. The angel's presence began to dissipate, as did the heavenly environment around me. The last thing I felt was a wave of encouragement and blessing from the angel. After the encounter with the angel, I felt like I was being pulled back. The light began to dim and I found myself sinking back into the physical world. It was a strange feeling, like I was being squeezed back into my body. Suddenly the pain returned. It was no longer the sharp pain from the moment of the accident, but a dull pain that seemed to come from every part of my body. I opened my eyes and found myself in a hospital bed. The fluorescent lights were blinding and the smell of disinfectant was almost suffocating after the purity I had experienced. Doctors and nurses rushed around me, surprised by my sudden awakening. I heard someone say that I had been in a coma for 3 days. To me, it seemed like only a few minutes had passed since the accident. I tried to speak, to tell what I had experienced, but my throat was dry and the words wouldn't come out. A nurse gently asked me to stay calm, saying I needed to rest. But how could I rest? How could I just close my eyes and sleep after what I had experienced? In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, I struggled to process everything that had happened. The experience was still vivid in my mind, every detail crystal clear. The love I felt, Emma's presence, the visions the angel showed me, it all felt more real than the hospital room I was in. I knew my life would never be the same again. I had received a calling, a mission, and even though a part of me longed to return to that perfect peace I had experienced, I knew I had important work to do here on Earth. The recovery process has been a journey in itself, filled with physical and emotional challenges that I never could have anticipated. The first few days after waking up from the coma were a blur of pain, confusion, and a constant battle between the spiritual world I had experienced and the harsh reality of the hospital. The nights were particularly difficult. Surrounded by the constant beeping of heart monitors and the low hum of life support machines, I found myself unable to sleep. My mind swung between vivid memories of my experience and painful questions about its reality. One night, as I watched the shadows dance across the ceiling of my hospital room, I was overcome by a wave of doubt so intense it almost suffocated me. What if it was all just an elaborate hallucination? What if my oxygen-deprived brain had created this entire narrative as a defense mechanism against imminent death? I began frantically researching, asking nurses and visitors to bring me books and articles on near-death experiences, brain function during trauma, and even comparative theology. My hospital room soon turned into a makeshift library of sorts, with stacks of books and scientific journals covering every available surface. The more I read, the more questions came up. I learned about the brain's release of DMT at the moment of death, about how a lack of oxygen can cause vivid hallucinations, about how our beliefs and expectations can shape our subconscious experiences. Each new piece of information seemed to cast more doubt on what I had experienced. At the same time, no scientific explanation seemed capable of fully encompassing the depth and clarity of what I had experienced. How could a simple hallucination have given me such profound insights into the nature of reality? How could my dying brain have created such a coherent and transformative experience? One day, during a particularly painful physical therapy session, I had an epiphany. As I struggled to move my still weak limbs, I realized that I was applying the same rigorous scrutiny to my spiritual experience as I did to my physical exercises. I was so focused on proving or disproving my experience that I was losing sight of its true meaning. At that moment, I decided to take a new approach. Instead of trying to validate my experience through external evidence, I began to focus on how it had changed me internally. I started keeping a journal, recording not only the memories of my experience, but also how they were affecting my perspective on life, death, and everything in between. As I wrote, I noticed subtle but profound changes in myself. I noticed that I had developed a deeper empathy for the other patients in the hospital. I began to see their struggles not just as physical battles, but as spiritual journeys. I began to listen to their stories with a new level of understanding and compassion. My relationship with time has also changed drastically. Before the accident, I was always running, always planning the future. Now I found myself more present in the moment, more able to appreciate every breath, every interaction, no matter how mundane it seemed. One particularly notable change was my attitude toward death. Before, despite my faith, I feared death like anyone else. Now, although he didn't want to die, he felt a calm acceptance of mortality. Death no longer seemed like an end, but a transition, a passage to something beyond our earthly understanding. These internal changes did not go unnoticed by others. Doctors commented on my remarkably quick recovery, attributing it to my positive mental state. Nurses often stopped by my room, not just to check my vitals, but to talk, to share their own struggles and seek comfort. One day, I received a visit from a man I had never seen before. He introduced himself as the driver of the other car involved in the accident. He was visibly disturbed, filled with guilt and remorse. Instead of anger or resentment, I felt only compassion for him. We spent hours talking, and by the end, we were both in tears, not from sadness, but from a shared understanding of the fragility and preciousness of life. As my discharge approached, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was eager to get back out into the world, to share what I had learned. Another part feared leaving the safety of the hospital, where my experience was shielded from the doubts and skepticism of the outside world. The day before I was discharged, I had a vivid dream. In it, I was back on that spiritual plane, but this time as an observer. I saw countless souls taking the same journey I had taken, each experiencing their own unique version of the transition. Some seemed scared, others ecstatic, but all were being guided with the same unconditional love I had felt. I woke up from this dream with renewed clarity. I realized that my experience, whatever its ultimate nature, was not something to be proven or explained, but to be lived and shared. The doubts still existed, but now I saw them not as obstacles, but as an integral part of the journey. As I packed my things to leave the hospital, I found myself smiling at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was not the same man who had walked into that hospital weeks ago. He had scars, yes, both physical and emotional, but her eyes shone with a new light, a light that spoke of worlds beyond this one, of love beyond understanding, and of a journey that was just beginning. The day of my return to church arrived faster than I expected. As I prepared that Sunday morning, I felt a mix of emotions that I had never experienced before a sermon: anxiety, anticipation, a renewed sense of purpose, and even a touch of fear. It all mixed together in my stomach as I straightened my tie in front of the mirror. The way to the church was surreal. The familiar streets looked different now, like I was seeing them through a new lens. Every tree, every house, every person that passed by seemed to glow with an energy that I had never noticed before. It was as if my experience had tuned me to a different frequency than reality. Upon arriving at the church, I was greeted by smiling faces and warm hugs. Many members of the congregation had tears in their eyes when they saw me. I realized that for them, my return was nothing short of a miracle. As I walked down the aisle toward the pulpit, I felt the weight of their expectations, their hopes, and their fears. When I finally stood behind the pulpit and looked out over the congregation, I was hit by a wave of emotion so strong that for a moment I was speechless. I saw familiar faces, people I had known for years, whose lives I had shared in moments of joy and sorrow. But now, I saw them in a completely new way. I began my sermon in a way I had never done before. Instead of opening with a Bible passage or a light anecdote, I started by telling about the moment of the accident. I described the feeling of leaving my body, the peace I felt, the tunnel of light. I saw expressions of astonishment, fascination, and, on some faces, skepticism. As I delved deeper into my narrative, I noticed a change in the atmosphere of the church. The silence was palpable, as if each person was holding their breath, fearing they would miss a single word. When I got to the part about my encounter with the angel and visions of the future, I could feel the tension in the air. It was at that moment that I realized the true challenge that lay ahead. How could I convey the depth and complexity of my experience in a way that made sense to them? How could I talk about the unconditional love I felt, the expansion of consciousness I experienced, in a way that didn't sound like madness or heresy? I decided at that moment to be completely honest. I shared not only the beautiful parts of my experience, but also my subsequent doubts, my struggle to reconcile what I had experienced with my previous understanding of faith and reality. I talked about how this experience had changed my perspective on life, death, and the very concept of God. I explained that I no longer saw God as a distant judgmental figure, but as an all-encompassing presence of love that permeates all creation. As he spoke, I noticed mixed reactions from the congregation. Some cried openly, moved by emotion. Others seemed confused, trying to process information that challenged everything they had believed until then. And some, I realized with a sinking heart, seemed skeptical, even suspicious. When I got to the part about the visions of the future and the seals of the apocalypse, I felt a palpable change in the atmosphere. Some leaned forward, absorbing every word with intensity. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I saw a couple get up silently and leave through the back door. I realized then that my words were having a deeper impact than I could have imagined. I wasn't just sharing a personal experience, I was fundamentally challenging the worldview of many people there. I concluded my sermon not with a call to action or a grim warning, but with an invitation to reflection. I asked each person there to consider not just what I had said, but their own experiences of faith, their own moments of connection with the divine. When I finished speaking, the silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the reactions began. Some people came to me, with tears in their eyes, to share their own near-death experiences or moments of deep spiritual connection that they had never dared to share before. Others approached me with questions, some skeptical, others genuinely curious. "How can we prepare for what's coming?" asked an elderly woman, her voice shaking with worry. "Does this mean that everything we believed in is wrong?" asked a longtime deacon, clearly distraught. In the days and weeks that followed, I saw significant changes in the dynamics of the congregation. Some members who had always been pillars of the church stopped coming, unable to reconcile my new message with their deeply held beliefs. Others, who were previously just occasional participants, began to appear more frequently, thirsty for more information and discussions about spirituality and the afterlife. I began receiving invitations to speak at other churches, Bible study groups, and even a local conference about near-death experiences. Each time I shared my story, I felt like I was fulfilling the purpose I was given during my experience. However, I also began to feel the weight of responsibility that came with this new role. People began to come to me not just for spiritual guidance, but for answers about the future, about the meaning of life, about how to prepare for the difficult times I had predicted. One night, after a long day of counseling and discussions, I found myself alone in the church, contemplating the crucifix above the altar. I reflected on how my relationship with that symbol had changed. I no longer saw it as a symbol of sacrifice and suffering, but as a reminder of the unconditional love I had experienced during my journey beyond life. I then realized that my real challenge was not convincing people of the veracity of my experience, but helping them find their own connection with the divine. My role was not to be a doomsday prophet, but a guide to help people navigate their own spiritual journeys. As I left church that night, I looked up at the starry sky and felt a deep sense of peace. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, that I would face skepticism, resistance, and perhaps even hostility. But I also knew I wasn't alone on this journey. The love I had experienced during my near-death experience was not something distant and unattainable, but a constant presence, here and now. And it was this love that I hoped to be able to share, in some way, with each person who crossed my path from then on. The months that followed were an emotional roller coaster. On the one hand, I felt more connected to God than ever before. My faith, which had been shaken by Emma's death, was now stronger than ever. I was sure of divine love, of the existence of a greater plan. On the other hand, carrying the knowledge of what was to come was a heavy burden. There were nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, the visions of the angel still vivid in my mind. I wondered if I was doing enough, if I was reaching the right people. I began to notice subtle changes in the world around me. News of conflicts in various parts of the globe, political tensions rising, people seeming more divided and hostile towards each other. Were these the signs of the first seal being opened? I couldn't be sure, but my heart sank every time I saw this news. My personal life has also changed drastically. Some friends moved away, unable to deal with my new perspective on life. Others reached out, seeking guidance and comfort. A small group of people formed who took my vision seriously and wanted to prepare for what was to come. Together, we began to study Bible prophecy in more depth, not to predict exact dates or specific events, but to understand the spirit behind them. We talked about the importance of cultivating love, compassion, and faith in difficult times, about how we could be light in the midst of the coming darkness. Through it all, I felt Emma's constant presence, not in the same intense way I experienced during my near-death experience, but as a gentle reminder, a comfort in difficult times. This gave me the strength to continue, even when the path seemed uncertain. Now, as I approach the date revealed by the angel, September 18, 2024, I feel a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. I don't know exactly what will happen that day, or how things will unfold after that. But I know I did the best I could to prepare myself and those around me. I see the world with different eyes now. Every news of conflict, every sign of division between people, reminds me of the visions I had. But I also see signs of hope. People coming together in communities of support, acts of kindness amid chaos, faith blossoming in unexpected places. I don't know what the future holds for us exactly. The visions I saw were symbolic, open to interpretation. What I know is that difficult times are coming, but I also know that there is a greater purpose behind it all. It is not the end, but a transformation, an opportunity for humanity to evolve, to get closer to each other and to God. My mission now is to continue sharing my story, not to scare people, but to inspire them to prepare spiritually, to remind them that no matter what, divine love is always there, that even in the darkest hours there is hope. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Emma, about how she would be dealing with all of this if she were still here. But then I remember her presence during my experience, how she guided me and comforted me. I know that, in some way, she is still with me, supporting me on this journey. As the days pass and we get closer to the due date, I feel an inner peace that contrasts with the hustle and bustle of the world around me. I don't know what exactly tomorrow will bring, but I know I'm not alone on this journey. I have my faith. I have the people who chose to believe and prepare with me, and I am sure that, in the end, love and light will prevail. Whatever the future holds, I am ready to face it. Not with fear, but with hope. Not with despair, but with faith. For now I know, more than ever, that there is a greater plan at work. And in this plan, each of us has an important role to play.